35 years ago today, Al Pacino returned from a 4-year hiatus from movies with Harold Becker's fantastic suspense thriller, Sea of Love.
No offense, but you never did get her prince, did you?
She's not the shooter. I have done some desperate, foolish things.
You mean like being here with me? You're a good man.
You never know.
I always know.
What are you nuts? You just met her.
What are you looking for, huh?
She's a friggin' suspect, Frank. Just walk away.
This is getting out of hand.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for?
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this fucking incredible Saturday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 35 years since the release of a film that was, at the time, a big deal, not necessarily just because of its success or failure in terms of entertainment, what it does for the genre that it portrays, the actors in terms of their interactions, but it was a big deal because it marked a kind of comeback for one of the all-timers and always in the conversation for acting goats or greatest of all times, Al Pacino. Now, Al Pacino, from when he came on the scene, late 60s, early 70s, obviously Godfather was 72, but Al Pacino had worked very steadily through the 70s and into the early 80s. He was still working, making, of course, Scarface in 83. He made a really vicious, very, very problematic film with William Friedkin called Cruising, but he was very busy. He did a film in the mid-80s called Revolution, and I don't know, maybe it wasn't a good experience for him. The film is just a bad movie. It was kind of an attempt to realistically portray certain elements of literally the Revolutionary War, but I feel like Al was miscast, and there are times where even an actor as resourceful, as vibrant of a personality, as charismatic as Al Pacino can simply be the wrong actor for the role, even if from the craftsmanship standpoint he's prepared, he hits his marks, and he makes you believe in the character. So I don't know if that was what spurred him to take time away, but he did not make another movie for 4 years. And he's talked about this, the fact that he didn't disappear. He didn't become a hermit. He didn't go underground. He worked in theater, one of his first loves. But I guess he felt that he had enough of the sort of hustle and bustle of the movie business at that particular time in his life, as he was, in his mid-40s, let's say. So as he got through a couple of years, he began to at least get the idea that it's time to come back. Because it isn't that he didn't love film acting, it's just that sometimes the grind of sitting in trailers and waiting for setups, and now there's a weather issue, and somebody on the crafts team isn't here, and where's our fucking lunch? And the stuff that when you're watching a movie you don't necessarily think about. But as much as they're multimillionaires and all of that, they travel around the world, they are still people. And maybe Al just got fed up with how much fucking sitting and waiting is done on a major Hollywood production. Well, sometime in either the middle or to the late portion of 1988, Al decided he wanted to come back. It was never his intention to permanently stay away. So he started looking at different projects, and what do you do? Do you want to make a comeback? Do you want to make a big splash with like a Godfather, maybe a mob story type thing, right in the comfort zone? At this point, I don't know if Godfather 3, if there had been a script. I don't even know if there were discussions. These are the kinds of things that now we would know for sure, but unless you would have to ask a very specific question and just kind of get lucky in a Google search for these kinds of answers. Who was thinking what? Nowadays, it's all over the place. It doesn't really take very much to know who's doing what at what particular time, or who was thinking of doing what, because it's all out in front of us in 2024. So Al opted to make a film where he was going to play, kind of in his wheelhouse, a New York City cop. Although this is not Frank Serpico. Serpico is certainly the most famous film in which Al Pacino portrays a cop, because the movie I mentioned earlier called Cruising, he plays a New York City cop in that film. So it's a genre that Al had experience with, technically a cop thriller. It's what's interesting is you can say cop thriller, Cruising is a cop thriller, Serpico technically is a cop thriller, and the movie that celebrates its 35th anniversary, Harold Becker's Sea of Love, the film that I've been building towards that marked Al Pacino's return to big studio movie making, is also a cop thriller. But you would be hard-pressed to find 3 movies technically within the same genre more disparate than these. And that wasn't necessarily everybody's plan going in, but I would be willing to bet that Pacino saw an opportunity to make a commercial thriller, the kind of thriller that would get people talking, and he knew if we hit this right, this is a good story, it has great plot twists, and like who's the killer, it has all elements of that. Unlike Serpico, where you know who the bad guys are. And in Cruising, I don't know that you ever actually find out who the bad guy is. The movie's just not good. It's problematic for different reasons, but it's just not good. And for somebody as ingenious and brilliant as William Friedkin, it's one of the weaker films of his career. And even though he kind of sunk a little bit in the mid-90s movies like Jade, Friedkin, from a craftsmanship standpoint, he didn't lose anything off his fastball. So, the movie Sea of Love, I am ashamed to say I did not see it in theaters, even though a number of friends, now bear in mind, people in my friend group were mostly not yet 17 years old. So in theory, we wouldn't have been allowed to walk into the Sunrise Mall, Massapequa, and just go to an R-rated movie. We would need a parent or guardian. Now, Sunrise Mall, this was where most of us would congregate to go to the movies back in that day, especially when the old Pequa Theater on Sunrise Highway closed. It was sort of the only game in town, even though I was a couple of miles further west, also in Massapequa. But Sea of Love opened, and I saw the previews, and I wanted to see it. So essentially, in 30 seconds, the TV spot gives you this. Al Pacino comeback. Ellen Barkin, who I had really liked. She did a movie in 86, 87, with Dennis Quaid, also a cop thriller, where she plays a New Orleans district attorney who gets involved with a nice guy and a good cop, but he's not quite honest. He's a little bit corrupt. Played amazingly by Dennis Quaid. Certainly top 5 best Dennis Quaid performances. There are people still talking about that crazy New Orleans accent that he employed. People say, man, he got it so good. But then there were those who were saying, what are you talking about? He fucked it up. That's no accent. It's kind of like Al Pacino in Scarface. That doesn't sound like anybody from the part of the world where Al Pacino's character of Tony Montana is supposedly from. Fush you, man. Fush you, man. Anyway, so Ellen Barkin was already a kind of rising star, and she has a very distinct look. Like, she's striking, but not in the girl next door kind of way. She just has a very fiery gaze, and they played against that in The Big Easy, where her character is just a sweetheart, and it's Dennis Quaid who might be sort of taking advantage of her. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But the cast Ellen Barkin, and you had the always dependable, never not great John Goodman, plays Big Al's partner in the movie. And we get an idea that it is a murder mystery story. And the trailer, the TV spot, because I didn't go to the movies, I never saw the full trailer for this film in theaters. All I saw was the TV spot. The TV spot gives us, come back, there are murders going on. It appears to be some kind of a serial killer situation, but the people who've died so far, they can't really find a link. So maybe it's not a conventional serial killer situation. And Al Pacino, who should be very cautious, dashes what appears to be headlong into an affair with Ellen Barkin. The trailer very heavily suggests she's the killer. And it's ironic from a certain perspective that about 2.5 years later, Michael Douglas, Sharon Stone, in Basic Instinct, the setup that I just threw at you is very similar to what Basic Instinct also does. Now, the difference there, if you want to call it a twist, is that Sharon Stone's character of Catherine Trammell, she is a suspect in what appear to be serial killings. But she's an author, and the people who have died according to certain aspects of plots that she has discussed in her own work. But that movie very strongly suggests in the previews, go watch it on YouTube, and the same with Sea of Love right now. Okay, she's the killer. Now, sometimes when Hollywood has used that sort of on-the-nose promotion, sometimes it's deliberate misdirection, but other times they're leveling you. It's kind of like in the movie, this is a mild spoiler, in the movie Scream. The movie Scream beats you over the head towards the beginning with, okay, this guy for sure is the killer. And then we go an hour saying, well, I don't really think it was, and it turns out, yeah, it was. So you can't be sure based on a trailer one way or the other. So Al, in this movie, gives a very strong performance. It's a cliche to say that it doesn't seem as if he missed a beat, but he really didn't. Like, in an early scene, and this is where the subtlety in the eyes and the way that Al, with his very expressive face, could get his point across. There's a really wonderful scene where there's some sort of a convention or luncheon where a bunch of Yankee fans are going to meet Dave Winfield, Ricky Henderson, whoever were the players of that particular era were going to be there. And it's not really that. That is a ruse to get a bunch of people who, I don't know if they have like 100 unpaid parking tickets, but to get a bunch of people into this location so they could bust every one of them. And Pacino, we don't know that this is what he's up to, what's going on, but he starts to chat with a man, a young guy, probably in his 30s, and he has a small boy, and they're wearing their Yankee gear, and Pacino is just, being friendly, about to bust the guy, and he says something to the effect of, oh, you're here to meet, whoever, and the little kid is so excited, that Al Pacino, you start to look at his face, and he suddenly says, I don't want to arrest this guy, not with this kid, and he basically lets the guy go. The film acting, this is the first scene in the film, he's right on the button, and you already like his character, because this is a nonviolent criminal. Do we really need to humiliate him in front of his son, who is just excited to meet his favorite baseball players? It's all on Al's face, and it is just great. Now, when I first saw the movie, I rented it when I was 16. I was only into that scene because, maybe there'll be, a cameo from a New York Yankees player, and there wasn't. But you look at it now, and you appreciate the difference between acting for theater and the difference between acting for film. And Pacino has done both brilliantly. Another person who was brilliant at both, who just passed, James Earl Jones. There is a difference, because what I just described, in theater, it wouldn't hit the same way because the audience is hundreds of feet away, and you wouldn't get to see what Al Pacino does with his face and how we see him calculating and recalculating and making a decision all on his face without saying a word. We understand what he's about to do. And it pulls us into the character. This is a really good guy. He might be a great cop, but he is a decent guy. And there's no reason to do what he's about to do. So the story does take the form, and it does have a lot in common with the other kind of erotic thrillers that were in vogue. This was probably the first movie that did it, and it's not that erotic thrillers haven't always been in vogue. I'm not talking about Playboy Channel. I'm saying big Hollywood glossy productions with big stars of varying degrees, but big stars where the big stars get naked or have simulated sex on screen. I'm not trying to be funny. This is exactly what it is. So when I mentioned Basic Instinct, that's an erotic thriller. You had a huge star in Michael Douglas and a fast rising after the incredible success of Total Recall and how great she was, and same filmmaker, Paul Verhoeven, cast her in Basic Instinct. It was not a coincidence. But that's a movie where you had two significant players in Hollywood. They have a lot of sex in that movie. And then you look at some of the other films from that era, just a couple of months after Basic Instinct came out, Final Analysis, not good. Richard Gere, a young Uma Thurman, and Kim Basinger, years before she won Oscar for LA Confidential. So that's the kind of movie where you have very attractive stars, a lot of sex. Sometimes there's more skin than other times. There's a little more graphic in terms of the simulation of the sex than others. And not all of those movies are up-tempo, edge-of-your-seat, suspense thrillers, or, that sort of thing. Sea of Love, of the movies I mentioned, is the most edge-of-your-seat. It has the most a question of where it really makes you think and wonder who's the killer, what's going on here. Is this all deliberate misdirection, or is it not? And something that came up repeatedly in Basic Instinct is the fact that Michael Douglas's character of Nick Curran, he's pretty sure that Sharon's Catherine Trammell is the killer. And yet he still pretty much gangplanks himself to his own doom in his mind. He even makes a comment to his buddy on the police department, the George Zunza character, where he says, she's coming after me. She knows where I live and breathe. And he just willingly says, here I am. Let's have sex, and if you're going to kill me, at least let's do it first. Let's have some sex. Let's have a lot of sex, and then you can dispose of me as you will. So there are scenes in this movie that nowadays people might be scratching their head, but 1989, there were what I was going to say is the Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, etc. of the day were something that amounted to classified ads in, Woody Allen joked about it, the New York Review of Books, and sometimes in other magazines, like New York Magazine used to have something like that. So the similar concept in this movie, they have Al Pacino and John Goodman, they have like one clue. They have a fingerprint. And their investigation, this is still pretty early in the film, they're pretty sure that whoever the killer is has something to do with this particular want ad or classified or whatever it is. So Al Pacino goes on a number of dates with various women of differing ages. And the goal is to try to get a fingerprint match. And it's not something that I would have ever thought of even back in the day. DNA evidence, it was all different back then. This was very bare bones and low tech. Nothing like now. Nothing where you can scan something in a quarter of a second that, 35 years ago, you actually needed to match it the old-fashioned way by getting somebody's fingerprint on a water glass. So one of the women that Al Pacino meets in the film is played by Ellen Barkin. And unlike what Ellen Barkin does in The Big Easy, where she is this very kind of prim and proper district attorney, very, very attractive, but she doesn't lead with the fact. She doesn't lead with the confidence of a woman who thinks that any guy within 100 yards is already imagining pulling her clothes off. In The Big Easy, she comes across just like a regular person, trying to be the best district attorney she could. Family connected to it and all this sort of stuff. And Dennis Quaid in that film, his character of Remy McSwain, similar thing. His family is connected at all levels of the police department. But in that movie, Ellen is playing the prim, proper, shy of the pairing. Dennis is what they used to call a cock of the walk, where he's the central figure, he's the driving force, and he takes action. She's the one who is backpedaling and yielding. And in other words, it's on him. We can tell early on she thinks he's really hot, but she's not going to do anything about it. She is not an alpha. In Sea of Love, and it would be an interesting thing to compare what Ellen Barkin does in these two movies. She plays the kind of prim proper in The Big Easy. And in Sea of Love, she is hardcore. You could say, well, she comes across like a man-eater, but then you're still asking yourself, is this just her, this is how she comes across? Is it literal? Is it figurative? Is it symbolic? Is the movie cluing us into something? Or is the movie distracting us from what's really going on here. So Al and Ellen Barkin get together, and as I mentioned with the other films, they start having a lot of sex. They start compromising each other's virtue over and over and over. A little bit of a body heat angle where they're just having a ton of sex. They're not doing anything wrong, but as John Goodman, as his buddy on the police department, says to him, she's a murder suspect in 3 cases, Frank. What are you doing? But the world of the movie, there's a little bit of an element of danger, and it's partly why Al can't turn away. Much like Nick Curran in Basic Instinct, there's something about not just that Sharon is so hot, but that there's a danger, and it must be a bigger turn on that this might not end well. Or there is also an element on Basic Instinct, they talk about it, where Michael Douglas is convinced that she's the killer. He tells her to her face. That doesn't happen here. The film, though, plays fair with its audience, because we have seen movies with twist endings and things of that nature where you get the feeling that the film doesn't really layer it properly and doesn't really give you an idea or any chance to figure out what happened. What Sea of Love does so well, and Harold Becker, terrific filmmaker, he made a movie years later, which my dear old dad, who had talked about a lot of his love for movies, is imbued, within me. Harold Becker did a movie in 1993 called Malice. Now, I'll get to that, but I want to finish the point because, I got a million thoughts colliding in my head. Sorry. The movie plays fair with its audience, and there are moments where the shot making and the framing, where there is suspense building, because things look like one character in particular is guilty. And the way that Ellen Barkin plays this scene where she is angry at Al Pacino's character, and the way that she is questioning him and just spitting fire at him, you're so on the edge of your seat because you don't have any idea where it's going to go. What's happening? Is this going to be a big reveal right here? So Harold Becker, filmmaker, did a movie 4 years later. It came out late in 1993, which I've argued and I will always say is the single greatest year that Hollywood ever had. He did a movie called Malice, which was a film, also a crime thriller, a suspense thriller, a little bit of psychological thriller. But the movie does all kinds of stuff that you don't expect. The nominal lead in the film is Bill Pullman. And Alec Baldwin plays a brilliant doctor, and Nicole Kidman plays Bill Pullman's wife. That's a film that seems to set up one story, and then about 45 minutes in, it just blows it up. So Harold Becker was a filmmaker who was not afraid to take risks. He was not afraid to, pull the old Alfred Hitchcock and make you think, like in the movie Psycho, that this is going to be a story about Marion Crane. And it turns out it's not really a story about Marion Crane, it's a story about Norman Bates. In Sea of Love, for all of the finger pointing and the kind of cues that the filmmaker is saying, look over here, we still miss it. We still miss it, even though we say it's so obvious that it's her, it can't be her. You start calculating, well, who else could it be? What's going on here? I don't know anybody who has seen this movie who correctly guessed the identity of the killer on first viewing. And there's something to be said for holding the audience in suspense and not letting them down when all is revealed. It's one thing with the movie Scream, which came out in '96, about 7 years after Sea of Love. I don't know anybody who correctly figured out what was going to happen in the last 10, 15 minutes of Scream. There were so many red herrings in that. Everybody was like, oh, this one, that one. So I remember Sea of Love was a box office hit. It grossed at least somewhere between 3 and 5 times its production cost, including marketing. It was a big hit. And the song, it's an incredible song, and it fits the movie beautifully. See, sometimes you have soundtracks where a great composer does the heavy lifting. And for example, again, in Basic Instinct, the plots of the two movies are like 75% the same. I'd never really thought of it until now. But Basic Instinct, although there are regular songs on the soundtrack, when we think of Basic Instinct, if you've seen it, it's Jerry Goldsmith's unbelievable musical score that we think of. With Sea of Love, we think of the song. Da 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 da. Yeah, I'm not going to do it, but you understand what I mean. The film's usage in this movie is marvelous. That Becker got everything right, and yes, he had an advantage. He had a human cheat code in John Goodman. He had Pacino thrilled to tears, so excited to be back in the saddle, and an absolutely fire Ellen Barkin in the pivotal role, the sort of female lead. So film did do very well at the box office, and even with, and this is something I'm going to praise the people in my friend circle, even with as many people I knew, think about all the way back 1989, I'm 15, most of my friends were slightly older, but even the ones my age, for all of the people I knew who saw Sea of Love, no one spoiled it for me. No one spoiled it for me. When I saw the movie, I was just as shocked as anyone else at the final result, and oh my God, I did not have any idea that this is how it was going to turn out. And for this sort of film to be able to spring that level of surprise at the very end, man, it doesn't get any better than that. For this kind of movie to hold you in its grasp the whole way through and not let go until the final kind of card is pulled and we see, okay, here's what they were building towards. And then this is the kind of movie where you can say, it makes perfect sense. It does not feel like a cheat. As much as my generation loves the movie, for example, The Usual Suspects, I saw it in theaters, and I thought the ending was a cop-out and a cheat. I'm in very much the minority, the whole Kaiser Soze and who it is in it, but I did not like it. I give that movie 2.5 stars out of 4. There are people, Gen Xers, who have it in their all-time top 10. I barely give it a thumbs up. That is how aggravated I was by the last, the final 10 minutes of that movie. I walked out of the theater pissed off. Shit happens, right? But Sea of Love, 35 years old, unbelievable. Directed by Harold Becker and starring Al Pacino, Ellen Barkin, and the amazing John Goodman. This has been episode 303 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or any of the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.